Welcome back, folks. This is Shane. In today's video, I'm going to share with you a 100% free beginner's guide and tutorial for the LUMIX S1RII Mark II. And before we get into this video, just a quick disclaimer, I don't get to keep this camera. It goes back to Panasonic. I wasn't on any press trips or anything like that. So if you do enjoy it, please leave a thumbs up. Leave a comment below as well, and if you choose to, there's a super thanks option down there if you found it really helpful. Now, odds are this video will be quite long, so what I'm going to do is timestamp everything down in the description box so you can skip ahead to a particular section. I'm going to start by covering the video features, and then we'll go over to some of the important photographic modes. Let's get into it. In the box here we have a quick instruction guide, we have a warranty card, and there's also information on LUMIX Lab, which is a great app for transferring color profiles from your phone to the camera. In the box we've got a DMW BLK22 battery charger. Just know it doesn't come with a wall socket connection, so just use your phone charger, or if you're using something like a USB-C power delivery device, it will work with this. You can also power it from a computer, which is pretty cool. The battery included is the DMW BLK22. It's a great battery. It's got terminals on both sides. It's higher capacity than some of the older models from LUMIX, which is great. To insert this into the charger, all you need to do is have the pins facing up like this, pins facing up on the battery, and then boom, it will begin charging. If you want to rock it 1970 style, there's a camera strap here. I'm only kidding. And here it is, the S1RII Mark II. Let me give you a quick overview of the body design on here and a few of the things that have changed. So as you can see on the front, we've got our red record button for video. There's also a red record button on the top. So much like the GH7 and GH6, we now have two record buttons, and this is really helpful if you like to shoot video on your own, doing this kind of work. For example, if you're in front of the camera, that is, you can just hit record using this button. There's a custom function button that you can map to any feature on the camera over here. This front button allows you to take off the lens cap, so just turn it to the left, it will come out. If you want to lock it back in, all you have to do is align it and turn it back that way, and you're in business. The grip on this camera is very reminiscent to that of the S5 Mark II or X, and if you take a look at them side by side, you can see just how similar they are, both from the side and from the top, although the top does have a few differences. Let's take a look. On the side with the grip over here, we've got our media card base. So there's a CFExpress Type B card slot here, and a SD UHS-2 card slot, and I'll leave my recommendations for media cards down in the description. I'm currently using my CFExpress Type B card right now in my GH7, but it works fine recording all resolutions with this particular camera. Now to open this, all you needed to do is sort of push this down, push it out, and then let go of it, and it will open. To close it, all you have to do is click it back down. Right near the top here, there's a remote port as well if you plan on using this with a remote shutter. On this side of the camera, we've got all our rubberized doors which allow access into the ports. So we've got a full-size HDMI port over here. This is our USB-C port, which can be used for data transfer, or if you plan on powering the camera. We get a 3.5mm headphone socket so you can listen to audio in real time. And at the top, we have a 3.5mm audio jack. This can be used with microphones, wireless packs, and all that kind of stuff. Underneath here, we have our battery compartment. I've already used this little dummy battery door here, but I'll show you this. And this is essentially where we put the battery in. The battery goes terminals this way, and then we pop it in like that. It clicks into place. To release the battery, just push the tab and it will pop out. It's spring loaded, which is great. And to lock the door, all you need to do is click on here. Now this little rubberized door is in case you want to use this with a dummy battery. You can have a cable kind of hanging out of the bottom, which is awesome. To get this to go back in, you kind of just got to open it up like this and then just push it in flat, and it is now closed. If you plan on using this camera with an external battery grip, you can take this off and attach it to the external battery grip. It's a bunch of pins on the other side that will connect to this. These are so easy to lose once you take it off, so just make sure if you do put this back on that you push down and press it around so you don't lose it. I've lost one of these before and it was a huge pain. If you plan on using this with a tripod or selfie stick, our 1/4 screw point is right here. It's directly in the center of our lens, which is really functional. Now, the good news is even with a tripod plate, which goes out to about here, you're not going to have an issue getting access to the battery. Let's take a look at this top panel. So all of our photography modes are on this dial. On the left, we have our single mode, mechanical shutter, electronic shutter, handheld high resolution, timer, and time-lapse options. So you've got all of those options available at the twist of a dial over here. Now the cool thing is you can also lock this. So once it's locked, it's not going to move. To unlock it, all you need to do is push it down again and you're in business. On the same dial over here, you can see we've got photo, video, and S&Q mode. On the top section of this particular dial, or on the opposite side, you can switch it between each of these three modes, and it locks in beautifully. It's not going to accidentally switch to the wrong mode unless you want it to move, so it's very secure. Our on-off control is located right here, so all you have to do is flick this to the right, and you'll see that it's now on. It brings the camera on, and off is back off. Now, the boot time on this is actually very fast, so let's take a look at this. If I switch this on so you can see it, ready? 1, 2, 3, boom. It's that fast, and it's just got this message on because there's no lens currently connected, but it boots very quickly. One of the big changes here with this camera compared to a lot of others, say we're in video mode, for example, or photography mode, it doesn't really matter, and you use this command dial over here, you can go to Program, Aperture Priority, Shutter Priority, or Manual Mode just by turning this dial. You don't have to menu dive. I really like this. We still get the intelligent auto mode over here as well. If you just want to take a basic photo, it will kind of do all the work for you. It's pretty cool. Another huge benefit here is we get 5 custom modes on the top dial, which is a big upgrade over the S5 Mark II or X, which only give us 3 in this position. So that's great. Again, this is fully locking, so you can just lock it by pushing down. It's not going to come loose. Push it again, and you're back to where you started. Our shutter is located up here. It's basically our trigger finger. We've also got a front wheel, which feels really nice to use. It basically feels the same as the S5 Mark II or X. There's not a huge difference in the way that it feels. The back thumb wheel over here has been slightly repositioned. I didn't realize this at the time of my review, but it is slightly taller as well. So if you've ever had a problem with the S5 Mark II or X being a little bit too easy to change this dial, it is a little more recessed with this one, which is pretty cool. We have an AF on button over here for locking focus. If we're in manual focus mode here, for example, you can hit AF on and it will lock your focus point. This little lever over here allows us to change the camera from manual focus to continuous autofocus and then single shot focus. And single shot is best for photography and it's inactive when you're shooting video. So the 2 modes you'll be using in video is either C and MF. Inside the focus lever over here, we've got our autofocus button. This brings up all the modes, and I'll show you that in just a moment. We have an 8-way joystick on the back that feels fantastic. Our quick menu button for easy menu access. We have a D-pad that you can cycle left and right. There's also up, down, left, and right, and these can all be programmed, these button presses, to do different things on the camera. Our main menu button is here. It's also the set button, as you can see, obviously, from the text on here. The return key allows you to get out of certain options, and if you're previewing your files on Playback, you can delete them by using this button. The display button is over here, and this kind of cycles through the different modes of what comes up on screen or out to an external monitor. Over here, we've got our Playback button, and this allows you to play the files that are currently stored on the SD or CFExpress Type B card, and we have a lock option. Now, the cool thing about this lock option is it allows you to lock your settings. So for example, if you accidentally knock this or you accidentally knock the joystick or whatever while you're filming, none of that will matter. It also disables the touch functionality on the screen when you've got this down. Just make sure you turn it off if you want to adjust your settings. We get a high resolution electronic viewfinder over here. I think the dot was counted at around 5.76 million dots. If that's not right, I'll leave some information on screen. Our LVF button essentially lets you cycle through the modes of the live viewfinder, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And over here, there's a little diopter, and this allows you to kind of set the focus of how the screen looks. So if you're wearing glasses, you can kind of offset how it looks just straight out of the box. Maybe my favorite thing about this camera is the flip out and fully articulating touchscreen. So you can basically use it in selfie mode. You can flip it back so you can see it yourself. So you can kind of flip it down like this. You can flip it out that way. You can flip it back on itself. You can have it flat to the camera. You can use it in vlogging mode if you're, working in front of the camera this way, doing some sort of vlog. You can also tilt it like this. You can basically configure it in any orientation, and it just makes it a real pleasure to use. Now, if I'm shooting video behind the camera, handheld, I love it in this position or in this position. It gives you just a really great user experience. Now, if we take a look at the S5 Mark II, for example, I can only have it out like this in this kind of fashion, and I'm always looking slightly to the left. But with this, it's nice and centered. and it's just a more ergonomic experience overall. While I think technically this is the same screen found on the S5 Mark II and X in terms of resolution, it's fine. It's plenty bright and it works beautifully. To get access to the hot shoe mount, all you have to do is slide this plastic clip out and you're good to go. And this will give you access to this port, which works with the DMW XLR1 or DMW XLR2 audio adapters. If you're using a flash, you can also use it with this port. This camera has active cooling. It has a ventilation port under the LUMIX logo. And there's also two right between where the command dials are. You can see one on either side. It's just a little bit tricky to film. Let me show you how to attach a lens and take the lens cap off. So just push this button in over here and turn this to the left. And you can see that on the mount here, there's a little red dot right on the lower left-hand side. So when you take a look at the lens here, you'll see that there's a red dot placed strategically on the lens. So all you need to do is to get these two red dots to line up. Just move it around without pushing it in. It will click into place, and then all you have to do is turn it to the right. And it's clicked in. If you don't hear it click, it's not in properly. And if anything's grinding or doing anything funny, then you haven't got it connected properly. Let's talk about general navigation here. So our menu set button is over here. And as you can see, the menu is where I last left it. Now, the cool thing with this camera is if you've got it on video mode, you'll see this menu. And if I switch it to photo mode and go back into the menu, you'll see a completely different menu. They've separated this out digitally in the software. I love this. This is one of the best things about this camera. It's a lot more manageable. Rather than cycling through a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't relate to the mode you're in, I think this makes a whole lot more sense. We're going to start with how to navigate these menus. So as you can see right now, I'm using the left and right buttons on the wheel. I can use the D-pad here to cycle through the menu, or of course I can just use the wheel like this as well, which is great. So you can get to things nice and fast. Now, much like I mentioned before, you can also use, a touch on the screen if you want to do it that way, or you can also use this joystick. So there's plenty of different ways to work with the camera. And if you choose, you can also use these back wheels, help you get into different menus and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just going to keep it simple for now, but experiment around with all the buttons and dials. Don't be scared to do anything. You can't break anything unless you physically drop the camera, which I don't recommend. Let's start with photo profiles over here. So if I get into this, you can see all the different picture profiles built in. It's set to standard. Now, if we want to make changes to any of these, all we have to do is go down here and we can change the contrast, the highlights, the shadows, saturation, hue, grain effect. It's got grain effect built in now, which is cool. Sharpness, noise reduction, and then we're back to where we were. Now, by either using this control or using the D-pad again, I can cycle through all the different picture profiles. Some of these are black and white, some have more dynamic range than others, or less dynamic range than others. If you're a video shooter, try this. Cine-like A2 looks really beautiful in certain situations. It's one of my favorite profiles. A lot of folks like Cine-like D2. I find it does some strange things to the skin on most of the modern Lumix cameras now. And another one that I really like is Vlog, which gives you the most amount of dynamic range. Now, there's also a real-time LUT feature in here as well. So you can either use the Lumix Lab app to connect to the camera and import LUTs that way, or you can also use the SD card slot from a computer and then transfer them into the camera that way. There's a few different ways of working. We might touch on this a little bit later on. You can also customize your own photo style here. So if I go down here, I can choose, say, let's try natural, and then I can add more contrast, maybe back the highlights off, maybe add, the shadow, change the shadows, change the saturation, all that kind of stuff. And then if I hit set, my number one will now be my custom profile. So this is really cool. Again, it gives you full flexibility of how the end result will look. Metering mode is a really cool tool that allows the scene to be exposed in different ways. And if you're not sure what any of this is, just hit the display button over here and it tells you exactly what that option will do. So that's a really cool trick. Let's go into the default one, which is the one at the top. And if I just show you the scene, it's exposing it like this. So it's setting the shutter angle accordingly. I've got the aperture set to 1.8 and the ISO is set to 400. Now, if we go back into this and change it to center weighted, it's going to focus mostly on what's in the center of the frame, and it will expose that way. A really handy tool is this one. This is spot metering. So if we go back to the scene here, wherever that little blue plus is in the middle of the screen is how it'll be exposed. So if I bring it to somewhere brighter behind the camera, it's going to bring that down. And if I bring this back to the camera itself, it's going to expose the scene brighter. These are all tools that will help you expose the scene properly. Another cool feature on this camera is that we can change the ISO sensitivity. So say for example, we don't want the camera auto exposing past or below a point, we can set up where we want those points to be. And this is a really handy tool in case you're in a situation where the ISO would just ramp up drastically or vice versa. And if you don't want it doing that and you want to sort of capture how the room might look to the eye, then you might want to set the high threshold at a different spot. Shutter speed limiter is great. And what this will do, it doesn't allow you to basically set the shutter at a speed that's slower than the frame rate, which would make it all ghosty and sort of like trippy. If you don't want that effect whatsoever, leave this on. This camera has full shutter angle support, as you've no doubt already noticed, and by default it will be set to the top option, and to get it into shutter angle you can set it like this. Now it's up to you how you want to work. If you're mostly a photographer, you might prefer the standard shutter speed, and if you're working in video, shutter angle makes the most sense, because I can get into this, switch it over to manual mode, and as long as that says 180 degrees down the bottom left hand side, then the camera will have the correct shutter speed. I can change frame rates and all that kind of stuff, and as long as that says 180 degrees, then the camera is taking care of the shutter speed. i.Dynamic range is an interesting feature that's been around since the days of the G85, maybe earlier, and this is kind of like a way of milking a little bit of extra dynamic range out of the scene. You can leave it set to auto, which will change the way that the scene is sort of captured. It will give you sort of like I think it's a false sense of more dynamic range. It might just be adjusting the shadows and contrast. I'm not exactly sure how it does it, but play around with this if the scene isn't being captured the way you want. Let's take a look at the record file format, and this is where you go if you want to select between MOV, MP4, and Apple ProRes. So if we take a look at MP4, we're going to check out all the different recording quality options here. Now just know I'm in the PAL region. So this is set to 25 and 50 frames per second. If you're in North America, you'll see 24, 30, and 60 frames, and 120 and all that kind of stuff. So basically, I've got this set up for the way that works for where I live. We've got a couple of 8-bit codecs in here as well. These are really low resolution ones. I probably wouldn't recommend these for anything serious. But I tell you what, a lot of people often overlook the MP4 container, but the one I'm shooting with on this video is this exact one on my GH7. This is the 10-bit 420, and this allows you to get much longer record times. It's a really easy codec to work with, and it just looks great. There's also 4K 50p, completely uncropped, which is awesome. And we also have an 8K option in this menu. This is something that I didn't showcase on my review video, but it is there. It's really cool. Now, by going back up here, we can switch it over to MOV, hit yes. Go down. Now we've got like 7 pages of options. Again, if you've got this camera set up to the NTSC or North American frame rates, for example, you're going to see even more in here, but this will go all the way from full HD all the way up to 8K recording. Now 8K on this camera right now is with a 17:9 aspect ratio. Now, if you're not sure what all this jargon is on the left-hand side in the box here, I'll just give you a quick overview. So MOV is the container we're shooting in. Full frame means we're not cropping into APS-C in this particular mode. If you cycle down to a few of the others, you'll see this change from full frame to APS-C, which is a 1.5 times crop. If you want the full readout, or at least the full frame aspect ratio here, then set it to, or use the ones that say full frame. Our pixel count is here, so as you can see, that's true 8K with a 17:9 aspect ratio at 25 frames per second. Now 25p means 25 frames per second, or P on 24 would mean 24 frames per second, all that kind of stuff. The recording quality is listed as 420 10-bit. 420 10-bit files in this particular container are generally much easier to edit on your computer over 422 10-bit. If you're on an older system, you'll notice a difference. If you're on a new system, like one of the Mac Studios or whatever, you'll have no problems with all of these codecs, which is cool. Now, on the bottom over here, you can see it says recordable slot 1, 2, and SSD. That means you can record to either the CFExpress Type B card, the SD card, like one of these little guys, or of course you can output to an external SSD drive. Let's take a look at the Apple ProRes and ProRes RAW options. So if we go from Movie or MOV down to Apple ProRes, we can then go down to this menu option, and we've got all of these other options here. Now, these use a lot of data, but the great news is, with my SD card, you can find that down in the description, all of these modes will record to it. Or if you've got an external SSD, then you'll be laughing. These modes will work great. But RAW HQ is right at the top. There's also RAW at 5.8K under it. And then we start getting into the Apple ProRes options here. So this is a really powerful camera. It's got pro video codecs and features. I wouldn't be surprised coming up if this thing gets the Netflix certification because it has so much great stuff. Now, if you're shooting content for YouTube in a studio, MP4 will do the job. MOV will do the job, but it might be overkill depending on the modes. There's certain modes in here, like the all intra modes, which you'll see denoted with this, and also the one above it. This is all I on screen. These are overkill for doing any sort of video where you're talking to the camera. It's absolute overkill. So 420 10-bit or 422 10-bit 4K will be more than enough, but if you want, you can shoot all the way up to 8K and punch in and all that kind of thing as well. So yeah, it gives you lots of video flexibility. Now, the cool thing about this menu is you can filter everything because there's so much to cycle through. If you find yourself just wanting to use a particular resolution or a particular frame rate, I'll show you how to use the filtering. So you can see over here, it says display filtering. You can tap on screen if you want, but I just like to use this button over here. And then you can choose your frame rate. So for example, say we wanted to just shoot at 50p and 50p only. We hit display again, and now only 50p options are in the menu system. How cool is this? So this is a really easy way of kind of like niching the list. So the other way I could do this is go to, say, 25 frames per second, and I could make it 8.1K, hit display, and I've got one option. If that's the one I want to use all of the time, I wouldn't need to change it, but you can see you can really make some big changes to this just by using this display filtering option over here. The S1R Mark II has a brand new feature called Dynamic Range Expansion in brackets here log. So you need to be shooting in the Vlog picture profile for this mode to be active. If I switch out of Vlog, this menu option here, Dynamic Range Expansion, will be grayed out. If we turn this on and then we go into any of our video modes over here, you can see that some of them are grayed out and some aren't. And this will be the case whether we're shooting in ProRes, MOV here, you can see the same thing is true, or whether we're shooting in MP4. It's great to see it active in MP4 as well. So this container is not as crippled as it is on some of the other cameras. Now, the cool thing with this is if you're shooting, say, a static scene, you'll get an extra stop of dynamic range. But if you're shooting, say, high action sports or something really fast, like cinematic sort of style stuff, you might want to actually leave this off because it does increase the rolling shutter quite a lot. All right, let's take a look at the proxy recording settings. This won't work in all of the super high resolution modes, but if you're shooting 4K, for example, it'll be fine. So if we go in here, we can turn proxy recording on. What this allows you to do is to get a secondary proxy file. It's essentially just another video at a lower resolution that's much easier to edit and transfer maybe to someone else via Dropbox or whatever. So if you're going to be working remotely and someone else is doing the editing, you can get them started with the proxy files over just the full resolution ones, which might be, in some cases, impossible to send. You can change the recorded quality here from low, medium, and high, and these are HEVC files, as you can see from this side, which are high efficiency video codecs. So they're actually pretty good quality, but it just keeps the overall file size down. If you need timecode information displayed, you can turn that on via HDMI. Most people, I think, buying this camera most likely won't be using that. Just know there's no timecode port anywhere on the actual camera as a hardware port. There isn't one, so yeah, just keep that in mind. Let's take a look at the Q button. This is something that you no doubt become pretty familiar with almost right away. So this is our quick menu. Now just know what you see on screen here might vary from how you see it straight out of the box, but the straight out of box experience is really good too. So you can change your record file format. I'm using this dial on the top right hand side of the camera. We can change it to ProRes, MOV, and MP4. We'll just leave it set to MOV. And this will allow us to change basically our recording quality all the way from 8K. We can cycle all the way back down to the end here, which was 1080p. So I'll just cycle to that one and we'll leave it there. Now we can choose our picture profile in this option. So there's plenty of different picture profiles built into this, and you can fully customize them using these options on screen once you get into that option. We've got our auto white balance, which is my preferred one if I have to use any of them. We've got our white balance cool and white balance warm. So you can warm up or cool down the scene if you so choose. A lot of people love to shoot video, at least with the cool mode, and then you can warm it up in post. I just like this first one. It works, what can I tell you? We've got sunny day, cloudy day, and all of these different options here. You can also pick from your custom stored white balance options. So you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 in here. This doesn't allow you to set the white balance in terms of you can't actually capture a custom one from this menu, but this is where you find them. And then we've got all of our color temperature options here also, which can be fully customized. Now by hitting this white balance button on top of the camera, it brings up the actual white balance menu, and this can be fully controlled. So our Kelvin value here can be adjusted by going up from this menu and then using the up and down options to set a particular white balance numeric value. You can do it that way, or of course you can go into any of these four, push up, and then put a gray card or a white card in front of the lens and hit the shutter. As long as it's filling up that box, you'll be able to capture your white balance. Let's quickly take a look at the noise reduction option over here. So in the standard profiles like portrait, standard, natural, and all of these other ones, this will be set to 0. But if we're shooting in Vlog, I wanted to show you this because it caught me off guard before I knew this. We'll go over to Vlog. You can see that I've got it set to +5. Now +5 is in the center, much like how it was on the standard picture profiles. If you don't want to have to add noise reduction, leave it set to +5 and it still looks really beautiful. You can of course increase this by using the wheel on the top, or of course you can bring it down using the same thumb wheel. But I found somewhere between 2 and 5 is perfect for this particular camera when shooting Vlog in video. You can also fully customize what shows up using the Q menu. So this is a really handy feature. I use this menu all of the time. Let's take a look at the autofocus. Now there's a few different ways you can get into it. From the menu we were in before, you can be in this top menu, go over to focus, then go over to detect subject. There's other settings which we'll get to, but if you want to go this way, then you've got all of these options under this menu to choose from. I've currently got it set to human, and under this we've got target parts. You can either just go for the eye and face, or go for eye, face, and body. By far the best one in all of my tests is this mode, so just leave it on here. Now if we half tap the shutter, it brings us back to here, which is great. Now as you can see on screen, there's a yellow box around Jason Voorhees, which is pretty cool. Now another cool way to get into this menu is this button, the little flag looking thing here. This is the autofocus mode, so there's plenty of different areas. Now on the left we have tracking. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. This is the full area mode. If you're talking in front of the camera and say doing most of the sort of YouTube-y sort of stuff, then have it set to this mode. It will work really well. You can also set up some zone modes. I don't really recommend this one for video. What I would recommend though are these two, 1 area plus and 1 area. So if we take a look at 1 area plus, it's a box that you can move around either using your finger or just by using the joystick. I'm using the joystick just so I don't create any issues with the screen and my fingerprints. Now the cool thing with this is anywhere that box is, if it's touching what it detects to be a human, even off to, you know, pretty close, if it's within that area, right about there, then the human tracking box will come up. Now, if we move the autofocus box off to the right, you can see that there's no human detected there, so it's not focusing on it. This is like a box or zone priority mode with human tracking. Put it over Jason again, and we're in business. Half tap the shutter, or you can also push the, the menu set button, and it brings us out of the movement option. Again, you can just tap on screen, right? So if you want fast autofocus pulls like this, you've got them at your disposal. Just know the box or zone mode overtakes the area mode if you choose to use it. Now, if we go back into here and I choose 1 area mode, this is what I would use generally in the studio. I would set up a box about that big with human tracking on, and I would talk to the camera all day and it wouldn't lose me. So this is a really handy mode. Now going back into here, we've got a whole bunch of different options from our display button down here, or of course you can tap on screen. We've got human, animal, car, motorcycle, train, and aeroplane. So what I'm going to do now is show you car tracking, and then we're also going to test out the tracking mode that sets up like a new box area mode that's unique to this. So let's have a look. Now this works exactly the same way. If I move the box outside of the car, the background's going to be in focus. If I move it over the car, it's going to detect a car. Hit the menu set button or the joystick in button, it doesn't matter. And then you've got the car in the area tracked. Now, if I want to track a car throughout the entire scene, I would go back to full area like this. And as you can see, it's tracking the car fine. The other mode I want to show you in here as well, which is really useful now, is this tracking AF detection. Now to get this to work, just half press the shutter until this little zone area turns yellow, and then as we move the car in, it will begin tracking. As you can see, now it just follows the car anywhere because it's got that tracking mode enabled on that particular subject. Let's say, for example, you just want to tap to focus. The best mode for this would either be one area or one area plus. You can create a box in any mode just by tapping on the screen though, but these two modes work great. You can move this box wherever you like. You can enlarge it like that as well. And then if you want to, say, pull focus to my little souvenir over here, well, you can set the box up the correct size like this, and then it will pull focus repeatably and reliably. So yeah, it works really well. You can use the autofocus system much like you can on other brands, except I find the tracking on this even better than my Sony cameras. Let's say, for example, you want to change how the autofocus responds. You can go into the AF custom settings, and this is just for video, and you can go down to set here and change the speed and sensitivity. Now by default, the speed is quite fast. You might find that you want to maybe put it down to -2 or -3 and turn the sensitivity down a hair as well, and this will give you a sort of slower focus pull. Now this is all subjective stuff. You can leave it at 0 and 0 and it's still going to track and do all that kind of stuff beautifully, but if you're looking for a more sort of cinematic focus pull, definitely turn the speed down to at least -3. It will make a big difference to how it responds. Once you have your custom settings saved, you just got to make sure that it's on from this menu, and I'm just going to turn it back off. Now, Focus Limiter is a really handy tool. Say, for example, you only want to focus between a certain area, you can use Focus Limiter. Now, to get this to work, you basically have to pull focus manually to the background or wherever you want it to focus to. Then it says hit the white balance button, and then you hit the ISO button at the other threshold, and then it will only look for focus in between those two spots. Being that the autofocus is so good now, I don't really see a reason to use this unless you're doing something very particular. You can see on screen here, I've got focus peaking on, and from the same menu here, you can go into this option from the focus menu down to peaking, and then you can set it however you like. Now, I've got it set to +2. Some people prefer it to be set to +1. It's all subjective. And you can go in here and change the color. So if I want a color that really stands out in the studio, I'm going to try green. And there it is. Now the stuff in focus is green. We can go back in here, set it to a different color again. I kind of like this white one. It's usually pretty easy to see in most situations, so I'll just leave it set to that. Now this display during AFS, I usually leave on as well. This is autofocus single shot. Now if I've got the camera set to autofocus and I have this on, if I go back in and half press the shutter, you can see that it's showing me what's in focus. I love this tool. It's just one of those things I always leave on. Now let's take a look at some of the audio options built into this. So if I cycle through the display options here, you can see that it shows me the audio on screen, but when I go back to my normal display, here, it's not there. So I'm going to show you how to turn that on. It's from the audio option, audio 1, sound display on. Now you can set it as well. So I like it large so it's easy to see. And then we go back to on. And there it is. It's now on screen. So it's that easy to see your audio at a glance, especially if you're doing, YouTube stuff. You want to make sure your audio is good. This is just something I always have on. I'm looking at it right on the back of my GH7 right now to make sure my mic is all good. So fingers crossed it's all working. But yeah, that's how you turn that on. If you want to mute your sound altogether, say you're recording with some music on in the background and you don't need the audio, you can mute your audio. Now, from that screen that I just showed you before using the display button, you can actually tap on the microphone. It's a bit hard back here. There we go. And you can change up a whole bunch of different settings in here as well. You can mute your audio this way. This is the fastest way to do it. You can also change the gain from standard to low if you want to drop the microphone or 3.5mm audio input. By default, this doesn't record 4 channels of audio, thankfully, which is great. So you don't need to disable anything in editing. And you've also got this real-time and recorded sound. So there's a slight delay on recorded sound. It's going to be a slight couple of frames out from real-time. If you just want to monitor your audio in real-time, leave it set to real-time. I just leave that set to that by default. And you can go into this monitor channel here, and this is what you'd be listening to if you were monitoring your audio. So we have all the same controls here. As I said, we've got low and standard. We've got our record level adjust, same menu as before. So there's lots of ways to do the same thing. We have a sound record limiter level. I always leave this on. It just helps prevent clipping. It can still clip in certain situations, but the onboard microphones are pretty good. And they sound way better than you might think. I'm in a band, or I used to be, and I still play live quite a bit, but the audio quality coming off of these built-in microphones these days are pretty good. Now, the mic socket itself can be adjusted from the standard microphone input, which is this mic at the top I showed you earlier. We can change it to plug-in power. So it works as a mic input. Power is supplied to an external mic by the camera. So if you've got a microphone that requires power, leave it set to this one. There's also standard mic input and line level, which is actually lower. So say, for example, you're going out of a mixer into this, you can set it to line. From Audio 2, we can set up how loud we want our headphone level as well, which is pretty cool. So if you're listening back with headphones, you can sort of crank up the audio this way. Now just note, if I'm playing back a file within the camera and I'm looking at it on screen being played back, you can also adjust the volume by using the wheel. Let's take a look at some of these other video settings here. So the image stabilization on this camera is awesome. Some people say it's better than the S5 Mark II and X. I would say it's as good, but it has one better mode here called cropless. So from here, we've got cropless, standard, and high. Now with it off, you're getting the standard field of view. On the S5 Mark II, you would usually just go to standard, which crops in a hair and gives you amazing image stabilization. And then you've got high, which you can basically run with. Cropless is the new mode, and this gives you the same field of view as with it off. Supposedly it changes certain, I guess, characteristics of the lens or the view, but I can't see it. It looks exactly the same to my eye. So, and this works all the way up to 8K, which is cool. So if you just want to get great image stabilization for handheld stuff, cropless works well. Standard works even better, but cropless might be all you need depending on your shooting scenario. It's a great mode, and this is one of those reasons why this camera will no doubt sell like crazy for video folk. From the previous menu here, we have Boost IS Video, and this gives you tripod-looking shots when using the camera handheld. It's currently off, and I would leave it off most of the time, but if you do need it, you can just simply turn this on. Now, this might look kind of convoluted, right? So I'm going to show you some quick tips on how to make the most of the camera and how to set it up. So if I hold down this return key while I'm in video mode, you can see that we have all of these custom functions that we can add, or custom features, you might as well call it, that we can add to that button. And I've got Boost IS selected from the second menu, which means if you have a look up here, you can see that there's a little hand. Actually, I'll turn the cropless off. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. If I hit the return key, you can see that the Boost IS is on with the square box around the hand, and body is on. So that's just the standard IBIS mode. Now, I did the same thing with the custom function button at the top of the camera. So if I hold this down, it brings up the same menu, and then I can select E-stabilization. So now I can turn boost on and off. All right, I've just put the 20 to 60mm kit lens on here to show you a couple of the different crop modes, starting with hybrid zoom. So at 20mm, this is my field of view, and at 60mm, that's my field of view. So pretty normal there. Now, if we turn on hybrid zoom in the menu from menu option 2 here, we can turn this on. Keeping the camera in exactly the same spot, I can now punch all the way in to 125mm. This is crazy, man. All with the 20 to 60mm kit lens. If you're traveling, taking photos or video, and you want a bit of extra reach, this hybrid zoom feature is killer. Now, if we go into this menu and go down to lower recording quality, like this Full HD one, thanks to the size of the sensor here, it can punch even further in. So if you like to shoot in HD, check this out. 251mm on a 60mm lens, and all I have to do is turn the zoom ring on the lens to get this to work. I love it. If you like to use prime lenses, you can still zoom in digitally thanks to a mode called crop zoom. So this is the 24mm f1.8. We're going to go back to the same menu here. Hybrid zoom is off. It won't be enabled anytime you've got a prime lens on. We can go down to crop zoom. We can turn this on, and then we can use the D-pad to punch in. So this is a 24mm lens, allowing me to go all the way into 100mm when shooting in HD or 1080p, which is crazy. Now, if you want better quality video, you can go back to the recording quality options here. Set this to one of the 4K modes. I'll just use this one. We're going to tap left on the D-pad here, and now I can punch in 4K to 50 millimeters, essentially doubling the focal length or just over. So that's great, and this is 4K quality. Now, anytime you're using hybrid zoom or crop zoom, stick to 4K if you're in video. This does also work in photography as well, and you can select from a few different sizes in the photo mode. But yeah, the more you crop in, the worse the image quality gets, so this 4K solution here is the way to go. I can turn the new E-stabilization on and off and have access to both of them very quickly. So to customize any of the functions on this camera, all you need to do is hold down the button for a few seconds. It'll pop up the menu. If you can't do it, it won't show you the menu. Like prior cameras, we still get live cropping, and this is really cool. It allows you to basically set up a time at which the camera will sort of create a digital pan and crop. So if we go here, we can set up, say, one frame here, the other one over here, and then in like, oh, you can actually make it bigger like this. And then you can hit start, and basically if you're hitting record, it will then crop between these 2 points. So it'll start there zoomed more in. Obviously it'll be out of focus if I left it like this, but as it creates this static shot, it will pull back and create a larger frame on this section. Again, another huge benefit to the 8K sensor. All right, what we're going to do next is go through the cogwheel settings over here. Now, I'm not going to go through everything because we've already covered like the photo settings, for example. The LUT library is which LUTs you have installed, and I think there's room for like 30 or something. 39 LUTs you can install built into the camera without needing the phone, so that's pretty cool. The rest of these options I kind of leave just as they are. Now, one of the cool things about this camera is it's got the photo video separate settings. And as you can see by default, this is all separate. But say, for example, I'm shooting products and I might be taking a camera through an event, for example, and I want everything to be the same when it comes to the photo style. I can save that to the same. It means I'm not going to have a separate picture profile in photo over video. This is just a really handy tool of either separating or controlling the same functionality between both modes. One of the things I always turn off when I get a Lumix camera, and this is just the way that I like to work, is this manual focus assist option on the focus ring. So I'll show you how it works by default. So if I manually focus here, you can see that a picture-in-picture box pops up on screen. I can't stand this for what I do, but if you need it, it's there and on by default. So if you go into manual focus assist here and turn off the focus ring, what happens now if I use it? There's no more annoying pop-up. So this is the way that I like to work. I showed you the Q menu on the back of the camera. To customize this, all we have to do is go into the settings wheel here, go into the operation tab, go into the Q menu settings, and we can basically customize everything. So say, for example, we want to customize the photo mode or video mode separately, we can do so. And then I can change all of these things. So say, for example, I don't need this image area video option. I can change it to hybrid zoom. So now when I go back in, I don't have a zoom lens on, but if I did, I could use the hybrid zoom feature. This is one of the main reasons I've stuck with the Lumix cameras for so long, is I can fully customize this in an intuitive way that works for my particular shooting scenario. And you have access to all of this stuff. How cool is this? If you want the framing markers on, you can have it set to framing markers. So if I go back in here now, I can turn this on and the framing markers are now on screen. Now we have that lock lever that I showed you earlier on the top left-hand side of the camera. If we go into the settings here, you can control what actually locks or unlocks here. So if you want, say, this autofocus button to be locked, you can go in here and lock it off just like that. It's nice and simple, and of course you can use the D-pad if you so choose. I'll leave that set to default. Now if you want to use this constant preview option here, you can hit display and it will tell you what it is. So it previews the aperture and shutter speed effects on the recorded image. Most people like this on, which is cool, so you can just leave that set to on. It was on by default. I don't know if this was changed ahead of time or not, but that's where it's located. Down here we have this night mode, which gives you less projection of light off the LCD screen. You can also do the same on the live viewfinder up here as well. And I think if you're shooting in the nighttime, that might help you, but if you're in the studio or outside, you definitely want this off. Another option I usually turn on here is this level gauge, and this will give you a green bar across the screen. So if I tilt it this way, you're going to see that it's going to look unbalanced on screen and back to green, meaning that the shot is completely horizontal. Now there's luminance spot metering as well on this. So if I move this around, it shows you the exposure. If I move it to the background, you can see that it's now set to 84. If I move it to the foreground, it's set to 21%. I don't really use this that much. I kind of use the waveform a lot more, or I use the actual menu that I showed you earlier from here, which is this metering mode. So I would leave this set to this option and meter the scene that way if I need skin tones. And I actually go by this +3 EV. If you want skin tones, you generally want it to be 1/3 under, and that's about 18% middle gray. There's a few other tricks for this. If you don't know what that means, you'll get used to it. Log view assist means that we can view vlog a lot easier on screen or over HDMI if we turn this on. And this is great because vlog by default is kind of washed out and very low contrast, so you can turn that on from there. If you're using anamorphic lenses, we have 1.30, 1.33, 1.5, 1.8, and 2.0. These are all the Desqueeze aspect ratios that you can preview in camera. So again, anamorphic's a whole different thing. If you're just using any of the LUMIX lenses, you won't need to worry about it. But if you're shooting with a anamorphic from S1RII, you can turn that on there. Now, center marker is something that I love on my cameras, and I always put it to this one right here. It's just good to see exactly where the center is. If you're into safety zone markers, the camera also has some built in. I'll just show you this one. I'll turn it on. And we'll set it to, let's put it to 95%, so it's very obvious. And you can see it around the corner of the frame here. So if you're working with lower thirds or whatever, or if you just want to make sure nothing's going to get sort of cut out, that's a good way to work. Framing marker is located here. So if you want to set up a framing marker, if you're shooting open gate, for example, you can go in here and pick your aspect ratio. There's plenty to choose from. You might be shooting a 1:1 video, for example, a square one. So you can set it like that. Turn it on. I usually like 75%. Change it to a different color. Let's try this. And we go back and we didn't turn it on. Let's turn it on. And there it is. So now we're framed for a square video, which is great. And we can still see what's going on the edges. Now, if you prefer to see more of what's outside of the box area, you can go down here and change the transparency to, say, 25%, for example. And now you can see more of actually what's going on. We also have zebra patterns built into this, or as I would say, zebras, but it doesn't sound as good when you're talking tech. So we can turn on 1, 2, or 1 or 2 at the same time, which is cool, and we can set the thresholds for each of these zebras. Another new feature to this camera is false color. So this is fantastic if you want to know exactly how your scene is exposed. This is an exposure tool. So if we go into this, you can see that basically the green at the back is actually kind of like the correct exposure. But what I'm going to do, I've just moved something else into the shot. So if we take a look at this soft toy here, I'm just going to ramp up the ISO until he's green on his face. And that means that the exposure is right around 18% middle gray, somewhere around here. Obviously the lighting for this thing isn't set up correctly, but it's a really handy tool. Now, if you're not sure what all the colors mean, you can go into false color here and check out the index. So there you go. So as you can see, 18% neutral gray is where you basically want the skin tones, and that is what you would aim for if you're using this tool with someone in a shot. Now, if you want to use the waveform or vectorscope, you can find that from this menu over here, and you can turn on one or the other or turn it off. Now, one of the cool things about this is you can fully resize it and move it around. So you've got the ability to use your thumb or finger and then use this back wheel to resize it however you like. Just know if you're using this camera via HDMI, you won't see the waveform on the external display. So just a heads up there. This is pretty much like all the other cameras. Now, for example, if you want to quick map this to a function, I'm going to map it to this right button over here on the D-pad. So I'll just hold that down. I currently have that mapped to crop zoom, but if we want to change this, we can go through the menu here until we find it. I can't remember exactly where it is. Here it is. And we can turn it on. Now we can have the option to map either the waveform, the vectorscope, or both. So if we want to use both, if you want to use the waveform readout, you can turn that on by going to this menu under monitor display for video, and then you can turn it on from here. Now, as you can see, it's on screen. I can move it around with my thumb or finger and then resize it using this back dial over here. So it's very customizable. Now, if you want quick access to this rather than diving through the menu, I've got it mapped to this button where it will cycle through the waveform, vectorscope, and then it will go off. Now, to get into this, all you have to do is hold down the up, down, left, or right on the D-pad or wherever you want to save this to. And then you can go to this option 3 from menu 2. and then down to here, and then select either Waveform Vectorscope or both. Now if you just want one, you can set it up like this, so you can turn it on and off nice and fast. Another great feature built into this is the red record frame indicator. So if we're recording, you'll see a red box come up around the edge of frame, and I really wish Panasonic would put this on by default, but it has something to do with the SEPA ratings of the camera, so they leave it off, but that's how you turn that on if you want to use it. If you want to live stream with this camera, there's also an option for a blue framing indicator, which replaces the red with a blue anytime you're live streaming. Again, I would turn this on if that's a function that you plan on using with this camera. Our HDMI record output can be configured as well, so you can see that info display is set to on. So that means everything that we see on the screen will be displayed on the external monitor. Now there's a few different ways this works. With it on, you're going to see what you see here. Now if I hit the display button on the back of the camera, it's going to cycle through different options on screen, which will also affect what's displayed out to your monitor. Now say for example we're live streaming via some sort of encoder. Instead of just from this, we're going to an encoder or a switcher. We can turn info display off, which means now we're going to get a clean feed out of the camera to our HDMI capture source. Now this camera can eventually overheat, but there's a few tricks to it, one of which is by turning up the fan mode to fast or normal, or of course you can just leave it set to one of these two if you don't have any issues with overheating. Fast makes the fan a lot louder and it also drains the battery faster. Normal is what most people recommend. If you keep it at a normal speed, it's going to keep the camera cooler as soon as you start it up, whereas these two will sort of change the settings dependent on the camera body's temperature. So yeah, Auto 1 is set by default, but you can set it up to normal at the expense of slightly lower battery life, and yeah, it will help keep the camera cool, but just know eventually this can overheat, especially in direct sunlight. I love the fact that this camera also has tally lamps. That's right, we can go in and change them to high, low, or off. So if we want this back one to be brighter, I can set it to high. Look how bright this tally light is over here. This looks really cool. So whether you're in front of the camera or behind it, you know exactly when you're recording. And it works in combination with the red ring around the screen. Let's say, for example, you're someone who's doing a lot of manual focus and you want the camera to resume focus when you've got the camera set to manual focus. You can turn this on. So what this allows the camera to do, if I hit focus on here, if I turn the camera off, turn it back on, you can see the boot time. It's still in focus. This is an awesome feature, and this works even with these focus by wire lenses. Usually this would be something reserved for like a true manual focus lens, but it works beautifully, and yeah, it helps maintain focus after the camera's off. Another setting that I always turn on is the focus ring control. It's usually set to non-linear by default. I set it to linear. Now we go into set and we can select how far we need to turn the focus ring for it to focus from minimum to infinity. The sweet spot for me is 240 degrees, and we can go all the way up to 720 or maximum here. But 240 seems to be about the sweet spot. It means you don't have to do quite a full 360 degree turn to have it focus from minimum to infinity. Let's take a look at the wrench icon. If we go into card format, we can format the card. Now the only one I've got in there right now is my V90 SD card, so we can format this nice and simply like that. And there we go, so we're back. Now if you want to change the dual card slot functionality of the camera, we can change it. So the recording method is set up like this right now, record relay. So once one card fills up, it goes to the next one. You can use backup recording, or you can allocate recording, which means photos will go to one card and video will go to the other, or you can back them up on the fly. Now if you're a professional, say shooting a wedding, you can choose this backup recording option, and you know, if the worst case scenario happens, it's happened to me once, where you have a corrupt card, then you've got a backup of it on the camera, which is killer. You can also change the destination card slot. So by default, it's usually 1 to 2. So this is the CFExpress Type B card to the SD card. But if you just plan on using SD cards, you can switch it over to 2 to 1. For those folks who want to use the USB-C port on the side to record to a USB-SSD, you can do that as well, which is great. You can turn it on here. Now, I don't have one connected, so I can't show you the functionality of that. But once it's on, you can go to card format here, and the SSD drive will show up in this list. Another setting that I turned on as soon as this camera arrived was the thermal management. I had it set to high. By default, it's set to standard. High is what you want this camera on, otherwise it will overheat even sooner. Now, if you're using this in a colder climate, you might not have an issue with it, but if you live in a hot location like I do during certain parts of the year, this overheats quite a bit in combination with it being in direct sunlight and the ambient temperature and the high resolution sensor and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely have this set to high, and fingers crossed you won't see the overheating warning message. You can change the monitor frame rate from 30 to 60 and the live viewfinder frame rate from 120 to 60. You can go into the monitor settings here. You can change the brightness of the display and change the contrast, all that kind of stuff, which is cool. Now, the monitor backlight is set to auto. What I would do if I was shooting outside normally, I would set this to +2. This is very bright, but just know the higher you put this up, the more battery life it sort of drain. So you can keep that in mind. If you're shooting indoors, you just want to keep it low. You can turn it down to whatever works for your lighting situation. 0 is pretty good. +2 is great for a bright sunny day, or even +3 in a pinch, but auto works well. It kind of responds given the room you're in. Sometimes it can be annoying set to auto, so yeah, just find a setting that works best for you. Now, if you want to change the headphone volume permanently to something, you can go into this option here and set it to whatever level you like. I find level 10 to be about right. Now, one of the cool things about this camera is if I'm playing back a file, there is a built-in speaker here. So if I hit up to hit play, I can change the playback volume just by using the D-pad. So this is awesome. It allows you to set the right volume just for playback. To turn Bluetooth on, it's from this option over here. So go from the wrench over to in, out, 1, Bluetooth, and you can turn it on from this area. So you can turn that on. You can see that it says no paired device here. Please add the camera from LUMIX Lab. This might be kind of hard to see here, but I'm going to try my best. I haven't actually used this beta version of this with this camera yet, but if you go into here and just hit next a whole bunch of times, once you get through all this stuff, you can go to camera down the bottom, and then you can go to pair the camera. And this will just find the camera as soon as you get into this screen right here. So it's nice and simple. Hit pair and you're in business. Now, this app gives you shutter remote control. You can transfer LUTs to the camera as well, which is pretty cool. There's also a whole bunch of LUTs you can download by using the download button on this side or this bottom section of the app. I'll just quickly show you how to do one. Now, if we go to download here, we've got all these trending LUTs and all this stuff here. I'm just going to pick the first one I see, which is this one. We go download. We can download it. And now it's on the app. So if we go to camera and go to LUT transfer, we can go to device because it's on my device. So if we tap on the LUT we want to transfer to the camera and tap transfer to camera, we decide on where we want it. So I'm going to set it onto number 4 and hit transfer. And that's it. And now the LUT is built into the camera. As I showed you before, you can map things nice and simply. So if I want to turn real-time LUT on or off, all I have to do is tap down over here. And then I've got the no LUT option, Vlog 709, the 3 sample LUTs, and then Dramatic Violet, which is the one that I just installed. So it's that simple to get going. If you want to cancel real-time LUT, you hit the Q button from this menu, and you're back to where I started, which was the natural profile. If you plan on using this camera with Frame.io, which is an Adobe service, you can go in here and turn that on. I'm not an Adobe user, so I can't showcase that, but that's where you'll find it. And if we go down to this wrench here, you can save custom mode. So say, for example, I've got this particular scene that I really like how everything is set up. Maybe I'm using this in the studio moving forward. What I can do with this is save it. So I'm going to go into this save to custom mode video, and then we're just going to save this to C1. Now, the cool thing is you can change the title. So if you want to change this to, I'll just make it something that I would be familiar with here. I'm just going to call this tech. So this would be my sort of tech setup. And then, of course, you can add anything you like to the name. So, you know, call it, say, 25p, so I know exactly what's going on. And then we can hit set. And then we click yes. And we do that. And we're done. So the beauty of this is I could completely change modes on the camera. And then when I go back to C1, it's now saved to C1. So let's do that right now, real time. C1 is saved, and we're back to where we were. So how cool is that? And that's stored now until I want to change it. Again, I can just go into a completely different mode. You know, like C2, for example, it's going to have completely different settings. go back to C1, and I'm back to where I was. One of the things I usually do anytime I get a new camera is once I set it up, I use this Save Restore Camera Settings feature here. So I'll go into Save, and I'll save the current camera settings to the SD card. I'll then go on the computer, download that file, and save it somewhere else. So if I ever need to restore it, I can. If I make some mistakes or I don't know what I've done wrong, I can go in, back to the Restore option, click Load, and there it is right there. So that's how you load, and that's how you load custom camera settings from an SD card. Now, if you want to reset your settings here, you've got a few that you can choose from. Record settings are basically all your video modes and so forth, and photo modes. And hit No, reset network settings, no, and reset set up custom settings. I'm not going to change that either. So right now I'm just going to get out of that, but if you need to reset the camera, that's how you do it. You can also change the clock settings here, your time zone, your system frequency, which can be changed to NTSC PAL and true 24 Hertz. 24 Hertz is great if you're shooting films, for example, but if you just live in North America or anywhere that has... If you're in North America or Canada or anywhere else that uses the NTSC format, just leave it set to that. And if you're someone who lives in Australia or New Zealand or many of the other PAL regions, you can leave it set to PAL. We've got a pixel refresh option here. So if you see like a little bit of a bright pixel somewhere, you can run this process and that will help eliminate it. If you want to turn on or off the shutter curtain, you can do that as well. So if you want it closed, what's going to happen now, if I turn this on and turn the camera off, you can see that the shutter is now closed. If I have that set to open, it will be open like it would be, say, on an S5 Mark II or X. If you need to change the language within the menu system, you can go into this option. If you want to check your firmware version or update it, you can do so from here. Now, the firmware update process is pretty easy. Once you extract the zip folder on your computer, drag the bin file into your SD card, put it into here, and then go into firmware update, the process will start. Another cool thing with the LUMIX menu is, say for example, you don't want to have to memorize all of this menu system. You can go into this option here and click Add, and it's basically a custom menu that is only the things that you want in here. So I can go into photo styles, I can go save, I can go into picture quality, I can go into this, and I can bring up synchro scan, and then when we go into this page 1, you can see all of the settings here. They're grayed out because I'm actually in the video mode, and some of these relate to the photo mode. All right, over to the photographic section of this particular video. I've got the camera set to the photo mode, and I'm just going to put everything back to stock. So I'm back to the standard photo mode here, the single shot mode. And let's get into this. So the first menu that we see here is the camera, and we've got our photo style. So this is all the same stuff we saw before when it came to our picture profiles and so forth. Our metering mode is the same as well. So these are very similar to what you've seen in the video section of this video. If we go down to aspect ratio here, you can see all the different aspect ratios built into this: 4:3, 3:2, 16:9, and so forth. If you want to change the picture quality, which is kind of like the record quality option in the video menu, you can go into here, fine, standard, raw, and fine, raw, and standard, or raw. Now, if you like to shoot raw, you've got the ability to do so with this camera. Now, the picture size can also be adjusted from 44 megapixels natively down to 22, 11, and 2.5. If you're maybe shooting some stuff for eBay, 2.5 is more than enough. Handheld high resolution mode will give you a whopping 177 megapixel image almost, so it's crazy. And if you want to turn this on, you can turn it on in this menu. For whatever reason, this is off by default on some cameras, so yeah, go into this menu and you can turn it on from there. This is too big and you don't need 176 megapixels. You can get an 88 megapixel image, and you can see the resolution over here, and this is the resolution on the high mode. One of the cool things about this camera is you can set up a minimum shutter speed. So it's always set to auto by default like everything else, but if you want to change this to a particular minimum, you can do that. And this might be great if you're mostly shooting sort of like wildlife stuff or maybe sports. From the focus menu here, we get all the same tools that I covered earlier in the video. And just know if you're shooting in autofocus, for example, the menu will change. If you're in manual focus like I just was before, some of them will be grayed out. Now, much like the video mode, you can just simply tap this option on the back here, this little autofocus button that looks like the flag, and you can go in and pick your mode. And if you skipped ahead, I'll just show you how to bring up the detection mode. So if I hit up here, we're on human mode. by default, and then if I hit display, we can change it to any of these and they will track really well. Crop zoom is another really powerful feature. I've currently got a 24mm f1.8 prime on here. We can choose the minimum image size. So this will affect the quality a little bit, but we're going to go into, let's just try small for now. We'll go back and we'll turn this on. So I'm at 24mm. You can see that on screen. If I use this right D-pad, it's punching in all the way to 48mm. If I go back to this menu, change this to XS, go back again, look how far we can punch in now. We can go all the way into, oh, look at this, man. This is crazy. 101mm with a 24mm lens. Let me say that again. We're at 24mm back here, and this goes all the way in. Wow, look at this, man. This is crazy. To 101mm. Again, I'm really impressed with this feature. It's something that I hadn't seen up until recent Lumix cameras, and it's a really great feature. This camera gives us two different kinds of burst modes. So we've got our standard mechanical shutter burst mode, which is this one with the I, or the Roman numeral I there, and the one with the two, or the two eyes next to each other, the Roman numerals. This is our electronic shutter, which goes crazy fast. So yeah, this is a really powerful photographic camera, obviously, and you can change your pre-burst settings here from 0.5 seconds to 1 or 1.5. So if you hold the shutter down, it kind of starts capturing it before you actually push the shutter, and it will go back up to 1.5 seconds, which is pretty wild. Now, if you're on the timer section over here and you want to use the self timer, I'll show you how to set that up right now. So by default, it's on. If I half press the shutter and then press it in, it's going to count down from 10 seconds. And then if I hit the menu set button, it's going to cancel it. But let me show you how you can customize this. So by default, if you wait 10 seconds, it will take a single photo. You can wait 10 seconds and it will take 3. This is great for sort of like family portraits and all that kind of stuff. If you're doing a group photo, you can have it set to 2 seconds, or you can set up your own custom one. And in here, you can go anywhere from 2 seconds all the way up to 10. Pretty cool. Another cool thing to take note of is from this cogwheel, go over to the AF option and then pinpoint AF setting. And you can use a different mode in photography for pinpoint autofocus that you won't find in video. And I'll show you that right now. So if we go back to this menu, and I'll just put this to single shot, and then we go into the autofocus options, you'll see on the far right now we have this plus sign. So wherever I move this, it will really precisely focus in on that area, and there it is. And you can change what the picture-in-picture mode does as well. So if you want to see it on full, you can do that. And now we've got a nice big, shot of what it is up close without the actual box. I kind of prefer that, but you can work however you like. If you like picture-in-picture, you can leave it there. And if you want to change this, you can change it to long. It will take longer to find focus. Change it to short. It just seems more responsive. Much like the video mode, in photographic mode, you can also fully customize the Q menu, which is this button on the back. So say, for example, I don't like it set like this and I want to change some parameters. You can go into this menu here, go down to Item Customize Photo Mode, and then you can change all of this stuff. So to change something, for example, say I didn't want this drive mode setting option here, which actually, let's get rid of this flash mode. I'm never going to use it personally, so I can get rid of that. And I want this to be something else. I can just pick whatever I like from this option here. I might change this to filter effect. And there it is, right down the bottom. I can go in and I can change stuff up this way. There's a whole bunch of filters built into this camera, as well as the real-time LUT. While the photo and video modes are separated in the menu, thanks to these top two icons, once you get over to everything that's under whatever mode you're in, so as you can see, we're in the photo mode now, these menus are basically the same. So there's no real reason to show you all of this again, but I'm just going to show you a few little things in the S&Q mode, and we'll wrap this up. And now with the camera in S&Q mode up here, I'm just going to show you how to set this up. So S&Q mode won't work in every available resolution in this list. The ones that are lit up that you can see easily are the ones that they work in. And I'm just going to go up to 4K, 420, 10-bit over here. Now we can set up our slow and quick frame rate from this menu. So we've got 120, 160p, 30p, 15, 10, 5, 2, and 1. So if you want to do a time lapse, for example, and just let the camera run and it looks like everything's moving fast, it's all done in camera, you can set it to 1 or 2 or whatever you like here. Now if we go all the way up to 120 frames per second, this is going to be 4.8 times slower than 25 frames per second. If you're using 120p on a 30p timeline, it's going to be 4 times slower. Now the cool thing with this camera is, as you can see, if we go back up, we've got Cinema 4K that works with some of these slower frame rates as well, and 5.9K up to 60 frames per second. Now, the only modes I've tested on this camera that don't give you PDAF or phase detection autofocus are the 4K at 100 or 120 frames per second. This may change after launch, but yeah, especially 120p, it looks really good. Like the autofocus works really well, but it's not as good as phase detection autofocus. And after you stress test this a few times, you realize, yeah, it's definitely not quite as good as a lot of the other modes, but it works really well. The readout in this mode's nice and fast, and the contrast has a lot to grab onto. There's also not a lot of that sort of like hunting that used to go on back in the day, so I have no problems using this in terms of its slow motion capabilities. It works great, but just know the camera is capped at 120 frames per second, so we can go all the way down here, go back into slow and Q, and there's nothing higher than this. So if you want better slow motion than this camera, then I would still recommend the S5 Mark II or X. And there you have it. That's my beginner's guide and tutorial for the LUMIX S1RII Mark II. If you want to see my full review, I'll link it down below. I know this format for this sort of tutorial is very different to what I've done in the past, but it was easily the most efficient for me to do it while still covering all of the options. It saved me about 75% of the amount of time as my normal tutorials. If you can do me a favor, please share this video, or if you're thinking about buying this camera and it's helped you to no end, or if you've already got it, there's a super thanks option down there as well, but no pressure there. If you can just drop a comment, that would be awesome. Thanks again. I will catch you soon. See ya.